A memory from a while back welcomes us into the show as we get to see a girl named Renash Bell winning a tournament of spirit arts users called the Blade Dance and ultimately becoming the inspiration of many young people. Fast forward 3 years later, we meet Kuzuhaya Kamado, who had gotten knocked out by a girl named Claire Rouge after he had caused some problems for her. Kamado wakes up captured by Claire, who questions the guy about why he is on the Araishi Academy grounds as it's a girls' only institute. Kamado seamlessly gets out of Claire's restraints after teasing her and reveals that he was called here by the headmaster of the academy. As Kamado had lost his way on the way to the place, he decides to accompany Claire, who heads for a ruined establishment before turning to the academy. It turns out that Claire was actually looking to form a contract with a sword spirit in her desire for power to fulfill her dreams. The contracting ritual does not go well for Claire as she makes the sword go wild, and the altercation causes both Claire and her spirit named Scarlet to end up in a bad spot. The standard anime logic comes into play here as Kamado ends up saving the girl and ultimately forming a contract with the sword himself. After the contract, Claire starts to get annoyed as she gets envious of Kamado and tells him to be her servant spirit instead. Claire drags Kamado back to the academy with her rope, where he ditches her again to try and find the headmaster, only to get into more trouble with another girl named Ellis. Kamado finally holds a meeting with the headmaster named Greyworth, and he manages to convince Kamado into attending the school after the two have a little chat. A while later, Kamado goes around the academy with Ellis and comes to know about how he is assigned to stay in a place worse than a horse shed. Later on, after dealing with Ellis for a moment, our guy ends up running into Claire again as she keeps persisting about making Kamado her own servant. Kamado decides to play with Claire a little, and he is trying to tease her when their homeroom teacher stops the two and proceeds to introduce Kamado to the rest of the class. Kamado changes the opinions of most of the girls as he talks sweetly while introducing himself. The guy has to finally take a seat after all that chaos earlier when one more girl named Rinslet gets involved with him, even making the professor worry about what is about to come. The hectic first day ends for Kamado, and he is getting some rest in a stable where we get hinted about how Kamado decided to accept Greyworth's request as a strong enemy, who only Kamado can stop, is on the loose again. After only a little time into the academy, Kamado gets called by the professor, who reveals how Kamado's arrival will only be bringing more problems into the academy, as male entry is not supposed to be allowed here. The professor reveals that this academy was made to train shrine princesses and develop great spirit elementalists. Before she gets to the point and asks Kamado about his reason for attending the school, Kamado dodges the bullet for now and is later resting in his chat when he hears a knock at the door with Rinslet outside. She had brought some soup for the guy, but before giving him the food, she demanded that he must be her servant. After fooling around for a bit, Rinslet leaves the food for Kamado anyway. When he asks her if she wants to be friends with him, the two get disturbed by the arrival of Claire, who had also brought canned food for our guy, and the girls get into an argument where their insults later lead to the two of them fighting. The girls start using their spirits without noticing their surroundings and just end up destroying Kamado's shed in the duel. As if the situation was already not bad enough for Kamado, the Silvered Knights arrive with Ellis, and the whole situation ends up turning into quite a challenge later on, where Kamito is now supposed to fight with Claire and Rinslet as his shelter was destroyed. Claire decides to take Kamado to her place where Kamado makes his food, and the two sit down at the dinner table to talk a little. While the two were eating, Claire revealed her identity as the sister of the Calamity Queen to Kamado before the two head out to the location of the duel. The pair meet up with Rinslet, who was already waiting with Carol, and the Silvered Knights arrive to finally begin the Duel of Pride. Kamado spawned his sword, which came out to only be a dagger, and the teams start to move. The match was going somewhat evenly as Kamado's team was doing well with Rinslet's backup when Kamado had to tell Ellis to stop after a few minutes as the situation suddenly changed. Drastically, the story takes a twist as a monster comes out of the dark clouds above alongside a mysterious girl, revealing that she will bring Kamado's real nature out. The match gets put on hold for now as the mysterious woman sends the demon spirit towards the student. The group gets into an argument about who would be the one taking the fight head-on. When Claire, in her desire for more power, decides to fight the demon spirit and form a contract despite Kamito telling her to stay back, Claire starts the fight anyway. Even though she was moving around well with Ellis's backup, Claire ends up proving to be no match for the spirit that ultimately defeats the stupidity out of her. With her back against the wall, Claire is in a dangerous spot when Kamito decides to jump in, but he was a little late, which leads to the defeat of Claire's cat spirit. Kamito tries his best to summon the sword in his right hand, and even though there was some backlash from a supposed spirit named Restia on his other hand, Kamito somehow manages to summon the sword and defeats the scary demon. With the danger now gone, the group tends to the depressed Claire. But as Kamito tries to talk her out of it, he ends up painting himself from the overuse of the power. A dream shows Kamito's backstory as to how he went through misery and suffering as a boy when he was training in a facility before he met the spirit on his other hand named Restia that led him to become the legend of Renash Bell, who was fighting in the Blade Dance tournament at the beginning of the series. The incident had gotten to clear his head, and she had fallen into severe depression due to her stupid persistence from earlier. Kamito, on the other hand, heals and returns to the academy, this time with the spirit he had summoned in the fight with the demon. The name of the spirit was EST, and she wasn't able to get back into her spirit form due to some issues with Kamito's connection with the Astral Codex. Kamito's time with EST gets interrupted by Ellis, who as always had gotten the wrong idea. Before she decided to nicely sit down and chat with Kamito, she reveals that Claire had left on her own in her desire to form a contract as she wants to participate in the upcoming contract ceremony that is decided through another blade dance. After hearing that Claire is trying to fight in a blade dance without even a spirit, Kamito decides to help her out, and we move back to Claire, who had run into the same woman from earlier, taking a mysterious dark power from her without even thinking about its consequences. While Kamito was still on his way with EST, Claire in her arrogance and selfishness had already entered the blade dance without a spirit in her hands. Even though she was trying her hardest, her spirit magic turned out to be really nothing when compared to the actual spirits of her competitors, putting our arrogant girl at a real disadvantage. The opposing girls began making fun of Claire for her obvious foolishness, and as if that wasn't enough, they took the mocking to Claire's sister that made our girl snap from her emotions. Claire lost control of herself for a moment that forcibly activated the dark crest on her hand from earlier. The power surge summoned the dark Hellcat version of Claire Scarlet, and the dark aura rising from the cat made all the spirits around go absolutely wild. The tournament had to be called off, and as the audience evacuated, Kamito pulled up with EST to get himself into the action as well. Kamito concussed the Hellcat for the time being and headed to Claire to have a reason with her. Even though Claire was completely feeling helpless from both her past trauma and the loss of Scarlet, Kamito Amino manages to get her back to her senses after the guy confesses his feelings for her, and yes, all this is happening in the middle of an ongoing disaster. Anyways, Kamito makes Claire realize that her Scarlet had only disappeared due to a loss of spiritual energy that gives Claire enough power to get rid of the crest on her hand by destroying it after he defeats the Dark Hellcat to bring the original Scarlet back. But before the heroes could celebrate, the same woman who gave Claire the power comes up to spice the situation further. The woman turns out to be Restia from Kamito's past, and in order to force the real Kamito out, she ends up leaving after corrupting the reward spirit for the tournament. This little encounter with Restia had frozen Kamito's feet, but with some help from Claire, this time our pair jumped back into the action. As the spirit Juggernaut had already left to wreak havoc throughout the city, Kamito headed straight to the Juggernaut to perform his Ranash Bell sword dance and ultimately just cut the whole giant creature down into submission, leaving Claire with a deja vu. Kamito ends up fainting yet again from the recoil of his power, with Claire realizing his real identity.